they had the DNA evidence while he was in Idaho, they would have arrested him in Idaho. To let them go for 4 days with being observed, and then arresting him, and so it would indicate there were other things beside DNA that were involved.
That was famed forensic pathologist Dr. Michael Bodden saying that while DNA evidence led Idaho police to focus their investigation on suspect Bryan Kohberger, they likely needed additional evidence to arrest him, like possession of a white Hyundai Elantra. That model of car spotted near the crime scene after the murders and found at Kohberger's parents' home last week. We could get our first look at the suspect when he appears in Pennsylvania court tomorrow. His attorneys say he'll waive his extradition rights, which means Kohberger could be back in Idaho within days. Let's bring in our panel. Jack Jupin is a former supervisor of the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force. Bob Bianchi is a criminal defense attorney. Jack, to you first. Do you think that the prosecution, that police have what they need here, or what are their next steps to try to prove this case?
Thanks, Rich. Without seeing the evidence in front of me, Rich, obviously they have enough probable cause. They had enough evidence gathered for a judge, in this case, to sign the warrant for the arrest. Now, as some of your other guests have mentioned, there's other things other than DNA they're looking at. They're looking at phone records. They're tracking him. We can ping these phones and identify certain areas where this man has been and look at the history of somebody's phone records. And that'll give them also more probable cause to maybe say, hey, this individual, the defendant here, was stalking the victims for some time before this event even happened.
Bob, police say that they've got their suspect here and that he's their only suspect. Do you think that they should be looking for more suspects, or are they looking at more, do you think?
Absolutely. As a former homicide prosecutor, we do that for two reasons. One, to make sure there's not another suspect. But two, when you go to trial, and we would talk to our investigative staff, and sometimes there'd be some tension there, we have to eliminate every single possibility that a defense attorney is going to say they went to a certain conclusion and then disregarded the possibility of all other things. So one, you do it for the health of the investigation, and two, tactically, you're doing it to eliminate defense arguments down the road. And secondarily, the prosecutors right now want to make sure they're looking at the case, even if they have enough evidence. I agree, we don't have the affidavit, so we don't know exactly what's there, but they're not only looking at proving the case beyond a reasonable doubt, but they're also anticipating what will the defenses be in the case. Could it be an insanity, a passion provocation? In some instances, people argue self-defense. It could be it's not me. And what prosecutors do is they want to continue to develop that evidence so they can also eliminate what they anticipate will be the potential defenses at trial.
Jack, we had several weeks between the murders and an arrest here. Is that a normal timeline? I know every case is different, but what do you think took this long to get a suspect?
Rich, in a case like this, they're dotting their I's and crossing their T's. As Bob said, investigators are working side by side with multiple law enforcement agencies, as well as the prosecutors. And they're not going to submit that affidavit for arrest until they feel that they do have a probable cause. As Bob had mentioned, you also have to think about, what the defense is going to be here, too. The reason that maybe you didn't get DNA that quick, for exactly what you said earlier in the show, there were some defensive wounds. If we can, there's the theory of transfer, where every time an event takes place, a crime takes place, evidence is both left and brought away from the crime scene. And as you said, if there's any hairs, fibers, blood, saliva, anything such as that was cross-contaminated or across the scene, and they can match that up with the defendant here, he's going to have a hard time talking his way out of this one.
So, Bob, defense attorneys are very likely going to point out that the police have yet to establish a motive. They have yet to come up with a murder weapon, and also very likely could argue that maybe he was in the house before the murders, and his DNA, it's a college house. People go all the time. What do you think defense attorneys are going to be pointing out here? What kind of case are they trying to build?
Exactly what you just said right there. But, you know, a prosecutor always wants motive. I mean, that's a huge thing. However, motive is not an element of offense for murder, so it doesn't stop the prosecution. And, of course, you want a murder weapon. What's going to be relevant here is where is the DNA that was recovered? Is it underneath the fingernails? As was just indicated, the trace evidence is going to be very important. And, of course, there is some anecdotal information out there that there may be evidence that shows that his phone was pinging around those victims for a substantial period of time, days before the incident. Prosecutors will try to tie all of those things together to say that this isn't just somebody who was there maybe and left some DNA on a phone, but rather this is the person who's the perpetrator. But no matter how you add it up, they're going to go through the social media history, the electronic data, to the question you was asked before. This is an immense investigation. It takes time to do this correctly. I wouldn't doubt that they actually surveilled him for the purposes of getting some of his DNA. Did he throw a cigarette out, drink out of a Coke can, throw something into the garbage so that they could match that DNA with the DNA that's at the scene? So they've done an incredibly thorough investigation, 19,000 leads, tens of thousands of cars. This guy is in the vicinity. I heard that he was on one of the victim's social media accounts here. Stitch by stitch, prosecutors are going to say that's not an innocent, accidental thing. This is a purposeful, intentional, premeditated murder. Therefore, in my mind, the only question left, is it a death penalty case or not?
Bob Bianchi, Jack Jubin, thanks so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rich.